Today on Uncut with Lucia, I have Celeste Barclay. Celeste is a historical romance author, and she's here to talk about her last book, A Friend at Highland Court. So Celeste, welcome to Uncut with me, Lucia.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, I'm very happy to talk with you again, Celeste. You were a social studies and English teacher before becoming a full-time writer. Yes, is correct?
Yes, I did. I taught history, civics, government, economics, and literature composition for almost 16 years.
Which grade were you teaching?
I started out as a full-time high school teacher. Then I substitute taught when my kids were little because I wanted to do things like volunteer in their classroom. And then my last teaching assignment was middle school, so roughly 12 to 14-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. And what made you decide to become a full-time writer?
I started writing my first book, His Highland Lass, kind of on a whim. I didn't really plan it out very well. I hadn't intended to become an author, but I had some stories rumbling around in my head and I wanted to tell them. And after about a year and a half, I realized that my writing income was equaling my teaching income. And I was in a really just tough final assignment that was really kind of wearing me down a lot. I loved my kiddos, but it wasn't an easy bunch at all. And so it just became more and more appealing to be able to be a full-time author and work for myself as opposed to being in the classroom. And I left the classroom January of 2020. Little did I know what was going to happen, 2 months later. So I just was very fortunate with my timing.
Oh, and you have no regrets?
No,
No.
I don't. There are times when I miss teaching, but I do seminars and lectures and things like that and workshops for aspiring and emerging authors and things along those lines that kind of allow me to teach a bit. But no, I don't regret that decision at all. This is the best choice career-wise I've ever made.
Excellent. And where do you find inspiration when writing about a historical romance novel?
Some of it comes from just the true history that I incorporate. I write mostly about Scottish Highlanders and Scottish clans. And so there's a rich, rich amount of history available to me, dating back into the Middle Ages. There's quite a lot of reference material available, despite how long ago that was. So that helps, I'll research a clan and some event will happen and it'll, intrigue me. It'll spark my imagination as far as, the sort of the plot. When it comes to the characters, some of it might be, movies or books that I've read that kind of give me a little nugget or a little pearl to start with. And then I go from there and take it in my own direction. But a lot of it just kind of comes as I'm working, and a secondary character in one book will, gain traction with readers or with me, and then they have their own story to be told. And so one just feeds off of another.
As you talked about characters, what makes a good story in your opinion? And also, what makes a great character?
I think it has to be depth. There has to be a full story arc or full progression. You want to see not only action in between the characters, but you want to see the characters grow and change as they move along whatever the path is for the plot. And so having a great character is one that has characteristics that people like, that they might be rooting for, or a character who sees their own flaws and is trying to improve upon it, that they go on some type of journey, that they are not exactly the same at the end of the book as they were when the book started, that they've had some type of growth, and that the story moves along at a steady pace, that, there's not these long stretches where nothing is happening and, readers want to skip pages. But by the same token, it's not so fast that readers can't keep up with what's happening, or that there's too many pieces that aren't put together clearly. So just having a really well developed story arc that has a lead in with some rising action, a climax, then the falling action and the resolution, just making sure you have each of those parts.
I love like historical romance. And out of curiosity, were men and women, of course, more romantic those times? Were different than now?
I like to think so. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I definitely like electricity and indoor plumbing. I think there's some romance to that. But the notion of honor and chivalry and loyalty and duty and love, to me, they all go hand in hand, and they are part of the genre and why I write in that genre.
And have you ever thought about writing another genre?
Yes. I don't know. I don't know what stories are going to come to mind in the future. I have a series about Vikings, so not just the Scottish Highlanders. That's a whole different culture, a whole different time period. I have a series of pirates, which is much later. I don't specifically say the dates, but it's 1700s as opposed to 1300s. And one of the stories takes them all the way into the Mediterranean from the Scottish Isles. So, I like the adventure. I like to visit different time periods, different places, different cultures within my stories. And I have the ability to do that. My imagination takes me those places, and I have the resources available to have the factual history to go along with it to give context.
Also wondering to know, how do you research for your books?
A lot of it is grounded in a whole lot of knowledge that used to seem really useless, that was rattling around in my head with facts that only seemed to intrigue me and not as much my students. But, things that I have, tucked away over the years, a lot of it came from my childhood travels. My mother is English, so I spent a lot of time in England. So, firsthand experience visiting various places. And then I kind of research as I go. I have some favorite websites that I use, some favorite books that I use on clan history that are go-tos. And then, the internet is an amazing thing. A lot of clans have their own websites that chronicle their history. And so I can find a wealth of information there. I can even see images of primary sources. So I'm very fortunate. I'm not reliant anymore on just my local library. I can go much further afield, as well as the places that I've actually traveled to.
And adding your also creativity. This is the perfect combination, Celeste.
I'm more creative than I thought I was. I didn't give myself enough credit for that for a number of years. So it's been really fun rediscovering the creative side after feeling so very practical and analytical for so long.
And tell us about your last book. Is it part of the Highland series?
A friend at the Highland Court just came out at the beginning of July. It is book 13 out of what will be a 15-book series. And that story centers around two characters who are a little bit atypical for the genre. The hero has what we would nowadays call PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, from combat. I am a military spouse. My adult life has been spent around the United States Marine Corps. And so I have a number of friends who are combat veterans and have had various experiences. So I wanted to incorporate that theme into this book. The heroine is not your typical Scottish Rose. She's not fair haired and fair skinned. Her grandfather was what they would have called a Saracen back in those days, an Arab. So she has darker skin. She brings, different parts of that culture to her life in medieval Scotland, which is not unrealistic. The Scottish actually had a very strong alliance with the French against the English. And so in my story, this heroine's father was a mercenary in France for a number of years. And that's where he met his wife, our heroine's mother, who is half French, half what would have been Saracen. So these two characters are kind of a bit of an unlikely pair, but they've known each other since they were children. So it is a sort of friends to lovers trope or theme. And in the story, they are both working through their own personal challenges. Alexander, the hero, working through what was also called shell shock, his PTSD and flashbacks and things along those lines. She's contending with the colorism and ethnocentrism that she faces in her daily life at the royal court because she stands out. She doesn't look the same as the other ladies. So they have their own individual trials along with the overarching plot where there is a villain who is causing problems and is after them. So there's a little bit of everything in that story.
You used themes that are very common now, because before people didn't talk about PTSD and other problems like this. Yeah,
they didn't talk about it, but it still existed. That phrase in of itself, we've had a number of variations since basically World War I, starting with shell shock. So it's not a new concept. It's just a more openly discussed one, slowly but surely. So each of the books in that series has some type of underlying social message to it that was just as relevant in the Middle Ages as it is today. That these are part of the human condition, the human experience, things that my characters go through, the trials and tribulations that they face with their internal struggles are applicable today. They resonate with modern readers, even though I keep it in a truly historic context.
You've published over 30 books.
I've published 28. By the end of the year, it'll be 30. So there's 2 more, one in September and one in November.
Wow. And how does the cover process work?
I have been fortunate. I've worked with 2 very talented artists during my author career over the past 3.5 years. And generally what will happen is either I will find an image from a particular website. There's one that historical romance authors rely pretty heavily on called Period Images. I will find an image that I like, a couple that is posed, and I would send it to my first cover artist, and she would kind of, work her magic, putting in backgrounds and changing colors and putting on different clothing, things along those lines. And now with the artists that I work with more recently, I will fill out a sheet that sort of says, this is what I'm looking for. This is what the man should look like. This is what the woman should look like. I send her samples of the plaids that I want her to get close to. She can't use the exact pattern, the official pattern, that's not allowed, but she comes pretty close to it. I'll talk about any distinct features that I want her to emphasize, how I would like them to stand. And then she'll do a mock-up of the cover and send it to me. And I'll say, yeah, can you tweak this right here? I don't necessarily care for this. Or, wow, you hit the nail on the head with this one. And we go back and forth a little bit, but not much. Both artists, both women are incredibly talented at what they do. So I've been really fortunate. My grade school, my elementary school librarian used to say, don't judge a book by its cover. And let's be honest, especially in romance, we all judge books by their covers. So that's the first thing you see, whether you are in a bookstore pulling books off a shelf or on a display, or you're searching on Amazon, you see that cover. And if that cover is appealing to you, then you click on it or you pull it off the shelf, you read the description, maybe thumb through it a little bit or use the look inside feature and decide. But it's the cover that catches your eye. So that is a really, really important part of the process for me in publishing a book. And I didn't fully buy into that in the very beginning. I was very hesitant to invest in a professional cover when I wasn't sure if I was going to make any money off of my books. But when I got a professional cover, I started making money because they caught people's eyes, and then they were really giving me a try. But I had to get people's attention first. So I love the cover art process. I love looking at other people's art and seeing what my friends' covers look like. I love it when I open that email and I see that the first mock-up is there for a new cover. It's exciting.
Yeah, for me, this is the best part for me. And also like choosing the clothes and the face and the way they look like. It's a lot of fun.
It is. And the software that the artists have available to them now is pretty darn incredible. I mean, that's way beyond my skill set. That's why I have somebody who's a professional do it. But the things that they are able to do, the way that they can change clothes on the models and change their hair and, things along those lines, the way that they can drop in backgrounds behind them is absolutely incredible. And so they can really customize your cover for you based upon an image that somebody else might be using too. They bought the licenses for the same image, but the covers don't even resemble each other once they're made. So, like I said, I like that part. I find it exciting.
Yeah. And the writing for you seems to come so easy and naturally. Do you experience writer's block, Celeste?
Not writer's block per se. I mean, I do have writer's fatigue. After I finish a novel, because I do binge write, I write them very quickly. They generally never take more than 3 weeks at the very longest once I got started writing. So when I'm done, I'm tired. I take, definitely a few weeks off from writing. This year's publishing schedule is a little slower than last year, so I can take almost a month off between writing. And so I do that. But as far as writer's block, because I sit down and I write pretty intensively and I write every day for 2 or 3 weeks or thereabouts. I'm trying to take weekends. I'm trying. I stay sort of in that groove. So I'm not in and out trying to come back to it and pick up where I left off. I'm just, writing for 8 to 10 solid hours a day. And I'm very focused when I sit down to write. This is my job. This is what I do. This is my day job, sometimes even my night job and my weekend job. But just like anybody would go to work and clock in, clock out, I do the same thing. I put in a full day's worth of work every day. And so it just flows from there. I'm really fortunate. I haven't had any stumbling blocks as of yet. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood, because I have writer's block. I know many people who have, and it's kind of limiting.
Yeah, it's hard when you have multiple projects and things going on. And for me, that's why I tend to be a binge writer, where I'm all in and sort of everything else gets pushed to the side when I'm in the midst of writing. I'm very singularly focused during that time. Otherwise, it's very hard for me to come back into that space and to focus and to pick up where I left off. So I like to just pretty intensively write the story while it's rumbling around in there.
And out of curiosity, your kids are quiet kids?
I have teenagers now, but when I first started writing about 4 years ago, I had, kids who were still going to bed at like 8:30. And so they would go to bed and I would write after they went to bed, or on the weekends. I would write when, they were outside playing, riding their skateboards. I would write when they were at swim practice. But now my kids are older. I have a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. So they are pretty self-sufficient. And during this past year, while they were home doing school virtually, we each had our own space. And so during the school day, they were doing their schoolwork and I was working. And so I'm fortunate. I couldn't operate the way that I do if my kids were still young, if they were still little and they still needed me to be more hands-on. It wouldn't be possible. So I wouldn't be in the same place if they were still, if they weren't yet teenagers, basically.
Mm-hmm. And Celeste, where can our listeners find you and your books?
The easiest thing to do is to go to my website, celestebarclay.com. You can learn more about me. You can find descriptions and links to my books. You can find the links to my social media. You can contact me. You can subscribe to my free bi-monthly newsletter. You get a free book when you sign up, and you can get insider tips on sales and new releases. You get little snippets. I just sent out a newsletter today with snippets both from a friend at the Highland Court as well as the work in progress I have right now, an outsider at the Highland Court. So there are some perks to membership. But if you head over to celestebarclay.com, you will find everything you need there. And worst case scenario, Google me. I'll show up.
I'm super happy to be talking with you again. You are solar. You bring very good energy. And come back when you publish your next book.
I would love to. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to it.